It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Progressives won big at the recent Democratic nominating convention. Eli Savit for Attorney General, Amir Mackled for University of Michigan Board of Regents. There were cheers for progressive Senate candidate Abdul El Sayed.
ICE can't be reformed. ICE can't be retrained. ICE needs to be abolished.
And there were boos for more moderate speakers, like Congresswoman Haley Stevens, who is also running for Senate.
Get off the stage! You suck! Get off the stage!
Ouch. The moderates, as you heard in that clip, had a tough time. Progressives organized well, and now there's a lot of energy at their backs. But some are concerned that they will struggle to win general elections. Adrian J. Hemond is one of those people. He's a longtime Democrat and the CEO of Grassroots Midwest, a bipartisan grassroots advocacy firm. Producer Sam Corey spoke with him about the promises of progressive organizing and the challenges that could await them come November.
Outside of the logistics, which were kind of crazy because it took people hours to vote, what was your big takeaway from the Democratic nominating convention?
Big takeaway was that progressives, particularly centered around the Graduate Student Union at the University of Michigan, did a really outstanding job of organizing folks and getting them to show up on the convention floor. And that's how you win convention fights, is by who shows up.
How were they able to do that, to the best of your knowledge? Like, what did they do to ensure that that happened?
Sure. So the Graduate Student Union at the University of Michigan is super well organized, even by comparison to other graduate student unions in Michigan and around the country. And so they leveraged their internal organization to reach out to their counterparts at other colleges and universities and use those as a base to build out from, to identify progressive citizens who were most likely to vote the way that they wanted, and to get those folks eligible to vote and get them to show up at the convention. Being eligible to vote involves being a party member in good standing for a certain period of time. You have to pay dues. But once you do that, you're entitled to vote on the convention floor if you show up. And the GSU at the University of Michigan did a really outstanding job checking those boxes with enough folks to prevail in a couple of races.
You've said that they did a really good job of using social media to organize. And that was interesting because a lot of people try to organize or at least try to write things on social media, and it doesn't go well for them. To the best of your understanding, how did they use social media to organize in their favor?
Sure. They took it a step further than folks normally do when they try to organize with social media. Normally, people who, quote unquote, try to organize on social media, they really only do the first step, which is getting people to tell on themselves about where they stand on an issue, in an election, et cetera. That's the easy part. You've got to take that from the virtual world into the real world and get people to do things besides type, right? And that is much more difficult. And that's usually the missing step with online organizing. You can organize people to send an email to their member of Congress or to type something on the device where they encounter you, but then translating that into real world action is harder. And it typically involves getting in people's faces. The most effective thing in politics is having a face-to-face conversation with someone. So if you can leverage online tools to get you to that point, opens up really wide vistas of stuff that you can do in politics that you can't do with just an online-only approach.
Right. It's not just telling people your beliefs. It's not just saying, hey, this candidate is great, or hey, this issue matters. It's actually organizing. It's actually reaching out to people via social media to see them in person, to then have longer discussions, longer conversations about their perspectives, and then trying to continue to do that at scale.
That's right. And giving people bite-sized chunks of work, right? So in this instance, you needed to get people to join the Michigan Democratic Party and to pay dues. Those are concrete, real-world steps that you need those folks to do in order to get them eligible, but you're also testing them, right? If you connect with somebody online, you meet with them in person, and you're like, the next step is that you need to join the Michigan Democratic Party, and they don't do it, okay, well, you can move on to somebody else. If they do it, then it's time for the next tooth in the ratchet, right? You turn the ratchet a little bit tighter. And if they do the next more difficult thing, then you can turn the ratchet a little bit tighter. And obviously your ultimate goal, when you tighten the ratchet all the way down, that's showing up on the convention floor and voting.
I know that it concerns you for Democrats to have so many progressives running in the general election that they won't be able to get more moderate voters on their side. Why? Explain that.
Sure. The median voter in a statewide election in Michigan, and this is true in general nationally on average, is number one, they're not particularly politically engaged. They don't spend hours every day scrolling on the internet reading about politics. Their voting behavior is mostly going to be based on vibes, and it's going to be based on vibes about how the economy affects them and the people that they care about the most. Everything builds out from there in terms of people who are more politically involved. And, whether on the left or the right, people that are further out to the fringes tend to be much more ideological than the average voter. And that can be a real turnoff for people, right? I love having windy conversations about politics, but I'm also a political consultant. Most people don't like to do that.
So then what are the things that people want to be hearing specifically? Because I know that there are a lot of progressive candidates that will say, great, we're doing exactly that. We're talking about healthcare. We're talking about why people don't have enough money in their pockets and raising the minimum wage. What is it that the median voter wants to hear when it comes to the economy?
They want to hear about things that they have to pay for, or that the people who are closest to them have to pay for, like gas, like groceries. Not at an ideological level. They don't want to hear about how you're going to remake the economy. They don't want to hear about how you're going to make fundamental, radical changes to the way that we do things. They want gas to be a little cheaper. They want it to cost a little bit less to get a loaf of bread and some eggs at the grocery store. They are not interested in your theories about how the economy should function. They are interested in a more immediate sense. How much did it cost last time I was at the gas pump? How much did it cost last time I was at the grocery store, or I needed to get shoes for my kid, or whatever that immediate expense is? More political, more ideological people like to think in terms of the sort of grand sweep of history and how we're going to make fundamental change. Most voters don't care about that. They care about how much things cost.
When you look at Democrats in Michigan, be it at the state or federal level, that are good at getting moderate voters on their side, that are good at talking about making tweaks to the system in ways that they believe will improve their lives, who comes to mind?
Senator Alyssa Slotkin is a great example of this, and proof's in the pudding. She won a tough Senate election 2 years ago. She won multiple tough elections for Congress against high-quality opponents in a congressional district that leans towards Republicans because she was able to connect with those median voters in a way that was meaningful to them. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, another pretty good example of that, and someone who is, to Senator Slotkin's left, at least ideologically, who's done a very good job of connecting with regular people who are voters who don't have those sort of ideological priors that more political people have, and connecting with them in a meaningful way. There are lots of examples of, Democrats who do this, and some of them, their politics are relatively different. It's not about their ideological leanings or their policy prescriptions per se. Those things are important. It's about how they connect with voters and make voters think that they actually care about the things that are most important to them, which, again, are always going to be immediate economic concerns for almost every voter.
And so the goal, as you're saying, don't talk about the big picture. Don't talk about the structure. Don't talk about like these weird systems that we're a part of. People don't really know about that or think about that. They're thinking about gas price. How are you going to lower it? Cars. How are you going to make them more affordable? Housing. Like, what are you going to do to make that more affordable? But as soon as you start going into the way this apparatus exists and it needs to change, you start to lose people.
Yeah, especially because, and this is something that folks on the ideological fringes, left and right, often fail to consider, is that you are in a contest with others. You face a resisting opponent. This is not professional wrestling, right? And so, a great example of this that I always use vis-a-vis progressives is Medicare for all. Medicare for all sounds great. People think everybody should have health insurance. And so it frequently frustrates progressives that while everyone having health care polls very well, you, voter Joe Blow, losing your employer-provided health insurance, that polls terribly, right? And your opponents are going to mention that that is an outcome of the policy that you are pursuing. And so it's important for progressives or people on the far right, really anyone who's seeking to influence politics, to understand that you face a resisting opponent, and the most effective way that you can compete for the votes of voters is actually with some empathy for your opponent, not in like a therapy speak way, but actually trying to put yourself in the shoes of your opponent. If you were your opponent, how would you attack this proposal?
I want to hold on that for a second. A lot of times when I hear political consultants talk about what politicians, and particularly Democrats, need to be doing, it's being a loud moderate. And to a certain degree, it is being angry at the other side. So I actually wonder if you can pull out what you're saying a little bit more about listening to your opponent.
Yeah, I think that listening to your opponent and understanding what they are trying to achieve to the extent that you can, why they are trying to achieve it, and how in their shoes you would attack what it is that you are trying to do, right? Being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes to understand both why they think the way that they do, but how they are likely to resist you is really important, not just in politics, but in life.
Because then you can anticipate what they're going to do and work around it. You can essentially convince people. You can actually persuade people because you've taken the time to think about how folks who don't think like you think about this particular issue.
That's part of it, but also you are contesting for votes of people who are not paying close attention to an issue. And so your opponents, who are also paying just as close of attention to the issue as you are, they also get to have a say. This is what I mean about you're facing a resisting opponent. You don't just get to message to voters and they either like or don't like what you hear. They're going to hear from the other side.
This is The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Sam Corey speaking with Adrian Hemond, the CEO of Grassroots Midwest. Adrian's also a longtime supporter of the Democratic Party. We're discussing the political victories progressive candidates had at this year's Democratic nominating convention and what those candidates will have to do to win a general election in November. Adrian, there are progressives who will say, listen, more people are on social media now. It's not everybody, but it's growing. And that's how folks are getting their news. And so voters are therefore more open to candidates who exist at the edges, at the fringes of a particular party, be it progressive or MAGA. What do you make of that perspective?
It's correct, but that's a far cry from winning elections, right? It is true that the bookends, the furthest right and furthest left slices of the electorate, have been growing in terms of the purchase that they have with the American electorate at large and with the media, et cetera. That's all true, but that's a far cry from a majority in an election, right? Going from 10% to 15% is that's progress if that's what you're after, but that doesn't mean that you're going to win.
I want to push you more and more on this because I know the progressives will say that one of the most popular politicians around today is Bernie Sanders, a senator out of Vermont. They might even reference Representative Rashida Tlaib, who's, of course, a progressive Democrat out of Detroit. They'll say, going to Sanders, that, you know, he's able to win over gun owners and rural voters, but he's a democratic socialist and he's proud of it. Why can't the same kind of candidate win in a place like Michigan? They would say that that can happen here too. Bernie Sanders, of course, won the primary for president in 2016. Why can't a progressive do the same thing here?
There's some important context that's missing there vis-a-vis Senator Sanders' primary win in Michigan, namely that he was facing a deeply unpopular opponent in that primary, which always helps when you're trying to win a popularity contest. So I do think it's important to point that out. You know, Congresswoman Tlaib is a terrible example of this in that she's from the most Democratic district in the state, and so getting elected just involves winning a popularity contest amongst Democrats, and not just Democrats, but the most politically involved Democrats in the most Democratic congressional district in the state. If progressives can't win there, they can't win anywhere.
You make a point of emphasizing the importance of organizing, particularly behind trade groups and associations and unions. You also represent those groups in your work. We do a lot less organizing in those groups and in general and today in American society than we did decades ago. And so now those groups are a lot weaker than they used to be. I'm just wondering if I can hear you talk a little bit about why that kind of organizing in our politics is important.
Sure. I think it's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, specific to Democrats, that is always how Democrats in this country, at least for the last 100 plus years, have built political power, right? Is through voluntary associations like unions, like special interest groups in, for instance, the environmental or the choice spaces. That's how Democrats build political power. It's when they are at their most successful, they have organizing institutions that are working. So that's thing number one. Stepping back from the sort of partisan grind, I think it's actually essential for civic life. Part of the degradation in not just political conversations, but social and cultural conversations in our country is because those conversations have moved into the realm of performance art online, right? Anything that you or anyone else puts on social media is, by definition, a performance. You are putting out there what you want someone else to see, not your authentic true self. And the online environment lets you hide that. There's far less hiding in real life. Not to say that it's impossible to do, but those real, genuine social connections, not parasocial relationships with influencers, that's how the real world actually functions. And to the extent that we're seeing social breakdown, not just in the United States, but in most of the developed world, a lot of the blame for that has to be laid at people replacing genuine human interaction and relationships with parasocial relationships with influencers and politicians online.
I want to push you on this point in the realm of politics. I think a lot of people will say, honestly, I don't know that I agree. Like, trade groups have their tendencies to be undemocratic. I mean, you used to have more of a machine, say, in Chicago Democratic politics, and that was relatively exclusive at times. And that, where have we gone in terms of combating climate change, a really big issue? How have trade groups helped on that? We had right-to-work laws for a long time here. Why didn't trade organizations and associations do a better job of protecting that? What would you say to somebody who thinks that, yeah, actually, these groups maybe had their time, but they're not as democratic as they should be, and they haven't helped us do really big, important work that we need to do in the state and in the nation?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on there. The first thing is, just to pick up on the right to work example, I would argue pretty strongly that the degradation of a lot of these voluntary associations, whether they're labor unions or others, was in full steam by the time right to work happened, right? The political power of unions had been significantly diminished in this state by the time legislative Republicans and Governor Snyder enacted right to work in the state, which was subsequently undone by Democrats. So I think that's part of it is there's a little bit of a causation problem there in that part of what allowed Republicans to pass right to work in Michigan was the degradation of political power of labor unions. So I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing is that in the right to work context, we're talking about labor unions specifically, but there is no reason that any particular type of interest group needs to be privileged in that conversation, right? Whether it's labor groups or environmental groups or choice groups or any other sort of interest group. The bigger problem is having those groups at all that actually do in-person real world organizing as opposed to the online variety. And taking our conversation full circle, I think the success of the Graduate Student Union at the University of Michigan in translating that online organizing into real in-person organizing sort of points the way back to political power for Democrats.
As you noted, you're concerned about progressive Democrats in the general election, though, as you're talking about right now, progressives did a pretty good job, particularly the students did a really good job of winning these nominations recently. What would progressives have to do? How do they need to organize to win a general election in November? What does that look like, even if it's an uphill battle?
The first and greatest problem for them is, before you even get to potential ideological mismatches with the voters, is a question of scale, A little over 7,000 people showed up on that convention floor, right? Currently in Michigan, there's somewhere between 7 and 8 million adults that are registered to vote. So that's the scale problem right there, right? Is that if you want to organize graduate students and super progressive people to show up in a single location to perform a single action, that's difficult, but it's a doable task when you have millions upon millions of adults who are eligible to vote, and you just have to walk them through the process to get them to the convention floor and be eligible to cast a ballot there. When you're talking about trying to organize and message to literally millions of people, you have to do that same work, but you have to do it at a scale that is orders of magnitude larger. So that's the first problem. The second problem is progressives, and this is true in the further right part of the spectrum as well, have this problem where they think that being right is enough, that we have this great idea, we know, quote unquote, that it will work, and that's not even half the battle. Being right about something is, in some sense, immaterial. And the proof for that is all of the things that have happened in government over the last 50 years that progressives hate. They are welcome to think that they were right about every one of those issues, but they lost. And so being right is actually a pretty minor concern in the realm of democratic politics. You got to convince a bunch of other people that you're right, and that's something that progressives have been bad at.
I mean, if you were talking to him right now, in terms of hitting that scale, in terms of talking to people, like you're saying, a lot of this is in-person work, so it can't just be TV ads, but it would really be having to get into towns across the state and have conversations with people who really disagree with them or are just non-ideological. They just don't think about politics that much. And they would just have to do a massive listening campaign or a massive campaign of door knocking and organizing events for months. Is that right?
Years. Literal years. Like we're talking about building institutional political capacity, because that's what wins general elections, right? Is you have to have the capacity to go out and do that, not once, but at scale over and over and over again. It's part of the reason why, for as much as Americans tell us that they hate the political parties continue to succeed, because that's what they're built for. They're cartels that are built to win and exercise political power.
Adrian J. Hemond is the CEO of Grassroots Midwest. He spoke with the Metro's Sam Corey. We'll be right back.